The Archaeology of Death and Memory with Professor Howard Williams. It's Archaeodeath.
Welcome, Archaeodeathlings, to another of my Archaeodeath interviews in which I talk to leading experts and upcoming stars of academia in different regards about their research. And today we've got a really exciting guest who's just got a new book out, more about that later. But welcome, Alex. Would you please introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Hi, Howard. Thanks for having me on today. So I'm Alex Sanmark. I'm Professor of Medieval Archaeology at UHI, University of Highlands and Islands. Work at the department called Institute for Northern Studies, Interdisciplinary Research Department, and I am based at UHI Perth.
Well, I am very jealous of anyone further north than me today because we've got sweltering weather here in Chester, and I hope it's a little cooler where you are, but maybe not much.
It's for Scotland. Let's say this is very warm and quite humid.
Okay. Well, I'm if I melt during the interview, if you see me sort of disappear under the table, you'll know why. It's nothing to do with my brain not being able to cope.
But I'm sure you or anything.
Yes, exactly. But yes, it's wonderful to have this opportunity to have a talk with you, Alex. And obviously, we've known each other for a very long time, and we recently met up again at a public examination. Is that the best term for it in Sweden? For someone else who will also be appearing on this channel, Dr. Magnus McGuinness, and so it's a good crossover of. And I thought Alex would be good to have a chat with because you've been doing so much exciting interdisciplinary research. And but before we get into that, I'd like to, for the benefit of anyone who's new to you and it wants to get into the fields of study we're going to discuss. How did you get to do the stuff that you do, Alex? How did you become the professor you are today?
Yes, what a good question, really, Howard. Well, I guess I was, at that stage, I left school, I was doing bits and pieces, I was in London, I thought I really should go to university. What shall I study? And I just sat and I thought, what did I enjoy at school? What were the subjects that I really enjoyed at school? And I had to go pretty far back because I actually hated school from like age of 13. I just thought it was so boring. But I went back to primary. And I now know that I had the most fantastic teacher, and she was a lover of history and archaeology. We built a Stone Age village. We painted Viking Age ships, and I also found something that my parents actually bound for me. We drew Vendel period artifacts. I was like, age 7 and 8.
And they lodged themselves somewhere deep in your soul, ready to re-emerge. Yeah. Oh my word, that's so cool.
Yeah, so I found these little drawings, and we got Bronze Age, and then it develops over time and whatever. So I just thought that was fun. I'm going to do something that I actually think is fun, rather than.
Fair enough.
And my parents were having fits because they thought, "What on earth are you going to do with this?"
So it began at an early age, and you went back to, and was it a history degree you did at first?
I started off in history. Yes, I started off with doing medieval history, which was great. I really enjoyed it. And that was, but I had this fantastic tutor, Brenda Bolton, who, I mean, she's just the most amazing tutor person you could ever have, because she creates these small bubbles of people, and we had really like intense seminars when she was like, okay, read these papal letters, you take the side of the Pope, you're the opponent, and then we sat there and we ate like monastic food with olives and cheese and different food for different weeks, and depending on what monastic order we were, and as part of that as well, we also had massive field trips. She was obviously a historian of sort of Roman papal history. So we went to Rome, and she took us around, every medieval site in Rome. And we kind of skipped over all the sort of like ancient stuff. She's like, yeah, there's some, run in and have a look at the baths, but come out in 10 minutes because we've got to go. We've got none to meet. But basically that got me into and really a lover of everything medieval. And then Brenda was also so amazing because she always said, you should really use your strengths. What is it that you've got that's special that others don't have? And I wasn't particularly bent on going into Scandinavian stuff, but I thought, well, actually, I can access this stuff. I can read it. My parents took me around to runestones from like a tiny age as well, so I'd kind of done all that. So that's how I came into Scandinavian stuff, and then I graduated and wanted to do. So I wanted to do archaeology. So I did an interdisciplinary MA at UCL. And that led into the PhD and everything. And then I started being part of excavations. And then I realized that the best way for me is trying to use all the available material from the time period and try and work with it rather than ignore stuff.
Yeah.
You're never going to be an expert on every single aspect. That's not going to happen. But, having an understanding of all the different types of evidence for me is something that I really enjoy.
Fantastic. And that stayed with you right the way through. And your PhD was on conversion stuff, wasn't it? About how sort of Viking Age society saw God, or whatever the phrase is, saw the light, and all the processes. And that was because you did it at Uppsala, but in London, or was that kind of mixture thing, wasn't it? I can't remember.
Yeah, well, I was actually staying at UCL.
Sorry, right, okay.
I did, but it's published in the Uppsala series.
That's it.
That's why there's people often thought I did in Uppsala. It was just a very good way, because I didn't have to rewrite it into a proper book. I could kind of skip that stage and just get it out, because I was thoroughly fed up with that topic by the time I'd finished the PhD.
But you've moved on to other things. So let's. I mean, it's difficult to do it in chronological order of your studies, but I mean, and I've encountered you in person at different points in different places, including at various at Asper at digging. So we were digging the same year in the same. Well, not the same part, but near enough, and in Sweden, so in southern Sweden. So there's different places we've encountered each other. But I mean, one of the big things that led to a monograph and multiple publications and projects is assembly places. And I still set your medieval archaeology article for my students to read, which is just really, really rich and gets them into that data set and the landscape data for Sweden, but parts of Sweden, and also just gets them thinking about all these different data sets. You've got runestones are part of the story, burial sites are part of the story, roads are part of the story, and of course watercourses and so on. So I mean, I'd love to hear your work on sort of your introduction to that. I know you can't cover everything, but so how did assemblies loom large is, I suppose, perhaps our starting point.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I came across assemblies when I was doing my MA at UCL. Actually, I was doing a module with Andrew Reynolds on Anglo-Saxon archaeology, and I think we could pick our own essay topics, and I picked assembly sites, like Scandinavian assembly sites, and I found that essay quite recently. I got an A for it, but I think that's because I probably included all the material that there was. It's quite thin, put it like that. But so I was interested then, and when I came to then the PhD, I was going, should I do assembly, should I do Christianisation? It
was an early okay, yeah,
and I don't really know why I ended up doing Christianisation. I can't remember what I was thinking at the time. But then, so then I kind of left that behind. And then by the time I'd graduated and everything, then, of course, Stefan Brink had started publishing on this and, starting to pulling together some of the key sites. And I thought, this is so interesting. And then I started obviously working with Sarah Semple, who shared this interest with me. And we just saw that this is something that could really be taken further, and above all, looking at the actual sites, in terms of the archaeology, because nobody had tried to excavate an assembly site really, or they had maybe gone into the mound, but we would be taking this landscape perspective and looking at the sites maybe not as dots in the like a dot on the map, but an area, and I think that's the way you need to approach them. So it was just driven by this desire to know more, and also to, I guess, to first of all, find the archaeological signature, if possible, by the sites that had been identified. But also, we have so many other sites that appear in written sources, but nobody could say exactly where the assembly had taken place. And that is like, well, surely we can, get a better idea of that. So those were the two main questions, I guess.
So you started doing field work, map-based work, all the work.
It took a long time though. Yeah, I had this postdoc at UCL for about 2 years, and I basically, sat and collected data, and my GIS was just being loaded up with more and more and more stuff.
And so that's necessary, isn't it? Because you can't. It's not something you can just eyeball, like, oh, that looks like a bit of a thingy site. You've got to work with all these the available evidence, as you say, and and it's not chronologically easy to unpick either, is it? Because some of those case studies you use, it's mentioned, they move them around as well, don't they?
Yes.
That's very rude of them. It's not very helpful. Why can't they just have a static period? But society changes and their requirements change. So yeah, I mean, so how does that work? How do you refine down a chronology for the development of these kind of practices? These of meeting outdoors, and well, not just outdoors, but particularly,
particularly outdoors. Yeah, I mean, that's the chronology is the hardest bit, really, and also the chicken and the egg situation. Always like, how do they start using this site? Because obviously there's burials there, and sometimes there's settlements and there's rune stones. There's all kinds of evidence. And we don't know necessarily, was it an assembly first and then they started burying people, or did they start meeting here because there were burials here? And is there even a pattern there? I don't know. So I guess for me, the main driving point is, an assembly, if you're thinking about them, meetings of people, that is the point. So obviously you need a site that people can get to. Communication is that's kind of the prime driver. And I also think access to fresh water. If you're going to hang around for a bit, they want water. And then my theory is that they will have changed a little bit depending on political circumstance. Also, perhaps some water routes, as we know in Scandinavia, particularly Sweden, they change every time. They're no longer navigable, so maybe you can't reach the site. So then they move the site. But I think that we talk about long-standing practices.
Yes.
Clearly, but slightly shifting sites.
And so assembly sites are by definition difficult to see because they're temporary open air gatherings. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the meta story I get out of your work is, the Viking Age, and though, well, it's an easy thing, it's a straw man that we keep evoking, and no one really believes it. But then I meet people online and realize a lot of people do. But the Viking Age is about law and order as much as it is about raiding and pillaging. And I know that's a really dumbed down, boiled down point, but it doesn't seem. Let's put it this way. I still keep having to make that point. And so, maybe I hope you don't find that's too patronizing a generalization to say that I get away. I have to give to students and to the public from your work. Is that a fair? Do you think that needs qualification, or is that an okay thing to say?
Well, I say it myself. So
okay,
yes.
All right.
Because it does need explaining every single time, because it's the raids and the pillaging, all of that's kind of made it into the consciousness. And then that, just because a society is, externally violent and also internally violent, I think most medieval societies, I would say, to different extents, but then you need an internal system for, regulation and conflict resolution, and every society will have that. But yes, the case needs to be made over and over again.
Because violence is regulated. It's not just chaos, and this is the two sides of the same coin, isn't it? If you can, any society is not. No, we're not trying to say that society was a harmonious, peaceable time, but not
at all.
No. But these institutions are integral or everything would just fall apart.
That's right, and you can't just kill your neighbor every single time they move the fences into your your land or whatever. You need to have a way of resolving that.
Even academics need these things sometimes. But I was going to ask, so what is the for those who are new to this, what is a thing? What is an assembly? What type of things? You're looking for water, you're looking for space, you're looking for land routes. But what's there then? Is you've got burials that people meet at sometimes at burial sites or fords, or what kind of stuff do we hope to find?
Yes, I mean, obviously it will vary a little bit depending on geographical area, of course.
Sure.
So I put together a massive list,
Yes.
and my good friend Victoria Thompson Whitworth, she calls it my Lego set for a thing site, that you have all these different bits and pieces, and when somebody, because I think it's definitely elite driven, to have an assembly, that's really visible in the landscape is something that's elite driven, because. So, but with the help of the community, these sites were set up and embellished and changed over time. And then I think there were certain features that were particularly suitable to have. So apart from the communication routes, because that's kind of the standard, that's the starting point, particularly the Lego set, that's the flat green bits there, or you start building on. And then, mounds, yes, very, very frequently occurring, I think, because they connected with the land ownership, claims to the land, ancestors, and all of that.
Yeah.
Then it tends, a lot of the time, like especially then central Sweden, southern Sweden, where I've done a lot of work, there tends to be, they're connected to these massive roads that we can trace. I mean, obviously difficult to get the exact routes through time, but they do lead into these sites, and they tend to be lined by stones or wooden posts or whatever. So we do see this movement coming into the sites, for example, and a lot of the time, thinking about the chronology that you asked me for as well, many of them have like an earlier period of use as well, before we see these big monuments like the standing stones and the rune stones. Lots of cooking remains, like cooking pits and hearths, and they look like big like campsites, and that seems to be that they have been used for people gathering.
So the monumental bits are like the skeleton, and we've lost a lot of the flesh, so to speak. We've lost a lot of the ephemeral stuff, but you can still find the traces of some of that cooking and other activities. Wow. And I suppose one of the key sites you've been working on, which has hit the headlines recently, sadly, because it's a rare example of illegal metal detecting or looting. I don't know the details, but that hit the headlines. Is undertook. So is that I mean, it's nothing's typical, but is that a good site to talk further about?
I think so. I think because we've done so much archaeological work there, I think we see, there's a lot left on the surface that can be seen today by any visitor, and because of especially with all the geophysics that we've done, and now quite a lot of excavation as well, we do have quite a good idea of what's actually there. So I do think it's a good one to kind of advance our understanding of how the sites were used.
So what have we found there then? What have you uncovered with your work?
Yes, I mean, so we did start. This was actually again Sarah Semple and I. We started originally with geophysical survey there, and of the whole site. And I mean, it was crazy because it's just so busy. There's so much.
Really.
But what came out most clearly then was this long row of looked like sort of anomalies going across one side of the site, which we then excavated and found remains of these the post holes, absolutely massive post holes, held like wooden posts of that kind of size, and probably like 5, 6, 8 meters high, possibly. I mean, they are like 1 meter deep nearly, and contain like tons of stone. There's so much stone in there, it's incredible. So they are such a big feat of building, and then I've continued excavating more parts of that same monument. The interesting thing is that we get lots of different dates, complicated, so they seem to start around 600 AD.
Oh, right.
Then the latest ones we have are actually about 1200. Yeah.
So what are do we have dates for the actual graves then, or are these for the activities around the, because we've got some huge boat-shaped stone settings, you got mount, I mean, so I didn't expect it to be that early. I kind of got in my head, maybe I misremembered, but yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really, so a lot of the burnt material, the hearth, the river, if we start looking at that, we get sort of like 200, 300 AD. You know, that's where they tend to be.
Right.
And then there are burials, you know, from that kind of period and slightly later.
Okay.
And then it seems we get some posts from about 600. But obviously, I think we don't know exactly the development, but it seems likely that this was a monument. There was a need for a linear monument. We can get to that in a minute, but there was a need to have this linear monument at the site, and maybe these posts have been kind of, you know, rebuilt and added to as they needed over time. But I think that for a long period of time, there was a need to have that.
So why there? I mean, it's a ford, isn't it? And it's you know, it's on a major route. Yes.
So it's an interesting site, and this again, where, you know, all the my GIS mapping came in handy. You know, because obviously looked at old place names and also the historic maps, which is obviously quite late, but they start from about, you know, the 17th century in that area. But they do at least go further back in time, you know, all the sort of agricultural revolution, everything, when they started putting drainage ditches everywhere. You know how the landscape has completely changed since then. So if we go back with these maps, at least we get a much better idea of, you know, what the landscape was like in terms of wetlands, etc.
Right.
So it becomes really clear, first of all, that so this site is actually enclosed by water on three sides. So there's a water course, which is really small today, but that's where you've got the ford. But it was much bigger in the Iron Age, and so like the third side there's now a place name, which means the bog, basically. Okay. And that was much bigger. So three sides, the site was enclosed by water. And then there was this really big road, and which is kind of this royal ritual route for newly elected kings would travel this road and go around different assemblies in the Swedish kingdom. So they crossed the ford, the watercourse that encloses the site then, and at that point, as far as we can work out, that's when we have the first post in this monument. And the monument is at least 250 meters long, and it then goes across the only side of the site that's actually open.
Right.
As so in open, it creates like an enclosure.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. So it defines not
you
the sake. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you do get because this is the main point, I think, that I saw it here, and then when I saw this pattern of a site that's, you know, almost enclosed by water, and then the one open side, you have something that sort of shuts it off. I started looking at other sites, and that's a pattern that we can see again and again and again. I mean, sometimes there are small islands, for example, you know, they're fully enclosed by water. But there is absolutely a need for an assembly site to be enclosed. You need to know where the boundaries were.
So go on.
Yeah.
No. It's just so you do have islands as well. So everyone going there has to cross water. That creates a kind of equality, even though people may be traveling different distances, and it creates a certain degree of protection. But if these weren't open sites, no one could just rock up without being expected. There's controlled access, whether that's for the times when they're in active use. That's really important, because you can't have someone come in and steal the show, or, you know, upset the deliberations, or the whole thing goes downhill rapidly. And I know some of the later sagas, literature has those incidents of violence, you know, in the Icelandic context. But, you know, we can imagine that was a constant concern in other parts of the late Iron Age / early Middle Ages. And and the runestones, just for people's benefit, the runestones kind of they're late, but people tend to, popular imagination seems to make them the primordial thing that is to do with the Viking Age. But actually, we do have early ones, but most of the ones associated with these runes of these thing sites are sort of the Christian conversion period era, are they? Or
yes, absolutely. They are absolutely every single
Yeah.
one, more or less. Yeah. So I mean, the earliest ones are, late 10th century, but above all 11th century.
Right. Okay. So they're sort of their appendage is to their additions there to the existing site. They're not making the site in most cases from scratch.
No,
Yeah.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think are the with assembly site? I know you've been working on other things. I'd love to just ask about some other things, but I'll just to sort of close off the assemblies. Is there any other key points you think research is still to resolve, or you think ongoing work is trying to get still struggle with? I mean, you mentioned chronology is the big problem, but is there any other things that you think?
I mean, there are so many more sites to be found. I've done detailed mapping of, you mentioned my article, the medieval archaeology one, 2009, I think, when I went through, one county and I mapped everything. And when it comes to other counties, and I just went for the high level things.
Yeah.
I've not mapped other ones really. There's so much more. Anyone who's interested in this, getting to grips with one little area and start looking at that. And who knows what patterns come up there, There's so much that could be done.
I suppose the point from my perspective would be that there was a long time where very little was done, and suddenly we can celebrate the fact there's been such important work done, including yours, that has sort of broadened this out. But we don't want it to stop, do we? It's not done and dusted. It's not let's move on. And that's whether we consciously think about it, there's a collective that does happen in academia. There's that collective, well, we've done that now. And but there is so much that new voices can bring to this, new perspectives and new mapping. That's really cool. So are you still actively working on that? Because you brought your big monograph out on that, on looking comparatively, because you weren't just looking at Sweden there, were you? You were looking at Scotland and I've forgotten what else you did look at.
Faroes,
Iceland, yeah,
and Scandinavia, all of Scandinavia, a lot.
So is that for you done and dusted, or are you still? Is it ongoing work for you?
Well, they keep popping up, so I don't make them the main sort of focus of my research, because you just get a bit boring after a bit. But I do use it. So now, for example, I've been working on the sort of west coast of Scotland and looking at communication and settlement and the use of those areas by Scandinavian settlers, and of course then that things sites come into that so I use them as part of a data set, I guess, these days.
That's really interesting. And I do want to do a sort of shameful lodge myself into this research in some small, humble way, because we did this little collaboration on the representations of things in the TV show Vikings. And I have to confess, since I did that, being more online with non-academics, there's so much hate for that show and so much, frustration with it, because of the legacy of misunderstanding it's created. But I stand by the fact that we were actually quite forgiving of, we were critical, but I think we saw the merits of it, because never before, whatever we say, it's the first time that any show has bothered, or any type of popular media has even attempted to show anything about that aspect of late Iron Age, early medieval Scandinavian life, and so I don't know what you feel about it yourself, or whether you got any pushback on it, but I certainly am very critical of the TV show too, but equally it tried to do something with things.
I honestly, I absolutely totally agree. I mean, it is a TV show after all. There's not a, never said that there was going to be a full documentary accurately depicting everything. And as you said, I have never seen an assembly, depicted and application of law, referencing, laws, you've killed somebody, now you need to do this, and actually that had a reflection in later Norwegian law. I mean, I think that's fantastic. And as you said, you always had to point out that law and order was part of the Viking Age, and here they brought it in. It's great.
I'm interested. I was interested to hear whether you know what your take on it was, because we worked together by email and writing, but we
Yes,
never. I
yes,
don't think we ever had a proper face-to-face conversation about it. So I mean, or, you know, if it did, I've long forgotten. But I think it's really interesting to
Mhm.
to hear us, you know, to hear that, because, and I think that's true. Is so I found myself end up defending the indefensible of people going, well, they represented this round. I go, yeah, but it is TV, and
Yes.
it's not consequence free, because this is you know, so many people going, yeah, but they all had face paint and they were all spent their nights howling, and you know, and I get, well, and so, you know, I am critical of both the academic advice they got and the work itself, but equally
Yes.
I think
Yes.
it's and I use it for teaching. You know, I use it as I use my, when I do
Great.
my Vikings module, I do say, and here it is in the TV show, and so what does this tell us, you know, and get them thinking about it, because it's yeah. So, and same, I did obviously want to spend time talking about some of your other work, which I know much less about, I confess, but I know you've been working on waterways, and I'm really interested. I mean, I'm so keen. I don't want to I don't want to grab on all this, but I really want to learn more about this, because it
Mhm.
needs to be in my lectures more, and it needs to be in my learn more about it, because I'm interested in linear earthworks in relation to watercourses in Western
Okay.
Britain. So, you know, but tell me about your waterways work, please. I'd love to hear about this, Alex.
Oh, yeah. You think about the Orkney ones for the
Yes.
moment, or yes. Oh, that was fun. That was great, actually. Well, it was inspired by Barbara Crawford initially.
Oh.
Yes, because Barbara had written this article where she just pointed out that there were some place names in the West Mainland of Orkney, which is now, you know, inland. It's like the most agricultural area of Orkney, really, with two big sort of locks in the middle, but it's really farmland. And she was like, there are some place name here that really suggested of water. And there's the Narston, which is the most interesting, which, you know,
Oh.
translates like Knarrastad, which is like the farm of the ship, basically, or like a big,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, and there are other of those, and they are by the coast. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? So I was living in Orkney then at the time. So I was driving around and, you know, looking at the landscape. I thought, this is pretty flat. And then, of course, you get flooding after rain or whatever. So I saw these massive areas just completely flooded with water. I thought, this is probably like something in there. So then I was put in contact with Richard Bates at St Andrews, who's done a lot of work with Caroline Wickham-Jones in Orkney, and also his brother Martin Bates. And we just did this British Academy small grant, you know, application, got the funding. And it was quite funny because Richard and Martin are, you know, very much scientists, very much driven by the science. And I will all know it, like, yeah, but look at the landscape and think about the landscape views, you know, how they move in the landscape, and got the burials here, and look at the place. And they're like, yeah, yeah, there's some possibility here, you know. Then we did the field work, geophysics, loads of coring, and they're like, you're actually right. There's clearly water here. And I had this theory. My theory was, I don't know if you can envisage the West Mainland of Orkney, but you've obviously got the sea coming from the south and then going up into two lochs, which were connected in the past. And then there's a chunk of land, and then you come up on the other side and you've got the sort of Jarl stronghold, the Broch of Bursey. And I just thought, looking at this, and also look out here with the obviously assemblies came in as well, and other sort of names associated with Norse administration, and I just thought you could get here by boat. I'm sure you could. And yes, and then I was really happy because from a purely scientific point of view, with core sampling, dating, looking at diatoms and their geophysics, and lots of modeling of you know, watercourse modeling, we could show that this was, I mean, I'm not saying it was deep water, but it was deep enough for like a shallow draft boat to be moved across the mainland. So basically you had like an inland water route going through if not all, but most of the West Mainland. And that creates a whole new geography. And when you think about settlement, the landscape views, etc.
So that has basically transformed our understanding of every aspect of the landscape, because once you know that ships can get there, or boats can get there, suddenly everything's open to the whole relationship of power sites to coastal sites and places of power, and wow. And so that's going to take some time for people to sort of adjust, because the application of that is surely quite, widespread, suddenly to think about. See, when dealing with Wattsdyke and Offansdyke, there are some conspiracy theory mad ideas that there were ancient canals but I mean, and these are quite unhinged ideas, I have to say, with every disrespect to the people that do, because it's like, this goes like, there's bits where Offansdyke is literally almost vertical, there's no way, but they are interacting with watercourses, and they're interested in controlling movement across watercourses and along watercourses. So I think there's so many ways in which we're obsessed with, we create dry land discussions, even if or prioritize even though we know, we say, oh well, there's a bog there, and we can say that, but I think a lot of your work is wetland orientated, even if it's not in wetland, isn't it? And I mean that in a good way. It's thinking about that the many different resources and impedances, and I think that's so important. Wow. So that's an exciting piece of research, and we'll put links to all you've got, your books and your this piece of research in the Journal of Wetland Archaeology. We'll put in the description for everyone to look at. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, but I know time is limited, but I did want to have a chance, if we can, to discuss your brand new edited collection with this very evocative front cover. And that, and I was thinking about, and I'm doing this as a deliberate bit of rhetoric, I thought another book on women, and I thought, but there aren't that many. There should have been many more by 2025, and this is a really packed and important collection, in my opinion. But and I wasn't thinking that in a dismissive way. I was just thinking, oh, surely we've done that theme. And I thought, well, there's many studies have been done, but there's not that many books dedicated. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I have to say, at first, I mean, the initial idea, I mean, I've edited with Michelle Hayes-Smith, and it was her idea in the beginning. So she actually invited me to write something for it. And then I obviously thought, yes, it's a good idea, for the very reason that you say there aren't that many books. And we've obviously got Judith Yash's book, which is, old by now. And Judith says to herself, somebody needs to write a new book.
Sure.
We've got Johanna Friedrichsdotter, but she's done it more from like, young to old perspective, and mainly history based. Anyway, so Michelle, invited me to edit this with her, and I was really happy with that. But I also have to say that not all publishers were keen on it, because they felt that boring old women, really? Yeah.
It is. That's, again, we go back to that point we made before about people thinking it's done and dusted. It's like, we've done. I remember I had, and this is a joke. I shouldn't, because someone may be able to track down who said this. But I did work with a fellow postgraduate student once who said, and I thought he was joking, because he worked with some very prominent gender archaeologists, and I said, so what do you think of the gender implications of your work? He said, I don't do gender. but it just, I remember, this is like 30 years ago, but I've always used that as a laughing point. I don't do gender, like, oh, don't do that. Like, you don't do gender. Who doesn't do gender? But there is a collective sense that if you get one book out, that's it. And you're right, there's very little, and it's not done and dusted by any regards. And this contains some really important new syntheses and evaluations by familiar names, and some I don't particularly know, but cross disciplines, and it brings new stuff to the fore, doesn't it? And
I think so, and that's what we wanted. We wanted it to be focused on women, and pull out, really the different aspects of women's lives, from the everyday, and then obviously going into the ritual aspects as well. But really trying to have a multifaceted view. And I mean, it could have been even bigger, but this is what we ended up with.
So we have the housewife stereotype, and obviously when we're not debunking that, women are always casting spells or slaying legions on the battlefield. But there were other things women were doing too, trading and to do with the economic life, political life, social life. Yeah, exactly. And women were young, women were old, women were everything in between. It helps to that whole sort of box creation of putting there's all these things. Oh, and there were women too.
Yeah, I know.
It breaks that up, doesn't it, and makes it. And I love I love the hidden lives element, because it has multiple evocations of the hiddenness in it, difficult to discern in the sources, and I just get the idea, of course, hidden in terms of active avoidance, and there's lots of different ways of seeing that hiddenness. I like that as a sort of capturing title. That really works well. So I'm really excited to get into this, and we'll put a link in the description. Is there anything else about the book that you wanted to flag up for viewers and listeners?
I guess, I mean, I think what drove me in writing that, and what I actually realized thinking when you talked about, the hidden lives, is that, I have a chapter in there written with my PhD student, Tara Athanasiou, and it was all about trying to uncover the everyday lives of women. And I had intended that to be like a study. I wanted to go in to do a big research project on the everyday lives of women. And I was like, actually, I don't have enough evidence. I don't have the data for that. So, I mean, obviously, there is more than I've provided in this article and Tara has. But I just realized that there is so much here that needs to be done. And I feel that, because we're talking about the Viking Age as a time with, subsistence farmers, this is what people did every day. And I quite like to look at, crofters, for example. I don't know if you've seen, but there's like BBC Alba, for example, have a lot of like black and white films when they've done a day in the life of a crofter or a crofter's wife. And it's insane. They don't sit still for a second. They run around all day doing all these different chores. And it's like, so when you talk about these passive women, I'm going, oh, well, hello. That, they are working nonstop. You might not see it, again, hidden. Yeah. So I think there's so much there, and not just work to be done by myself, but by many others that could be brought out. And, just looking at excavations and all of that, I think that's an area that is absolutely rife for, further research.
I mean, I suppose as someone who isn't a woman looking onto this research, I see the importance of recognizing the power of the labor, the influence, the cultural significance of women, and all these different aspects. And yet also I see the sound biting down of this into some romanticized trope of women were free and women did this, and it can be empowering in that way, but that can lead to some rather nasty places as well, of the same kind of white supremacist sort of nasty sort of tropes of women that are just adjuncts to a very militaristic, exclusory view of the Viking Age as well. And so I in my attempts to deal with this online, I have to sort of navigate this course, and I don't know how it comes across to non-specialist audiences, because I think some people leap on it and think, yeah, there he is pushing back against the revisionist history that think women actually did things. And I'm not what I'm doing, but I'm trying to sort of, I can see these horrible people over there waiting for an opportunity to say, yes, the pure noble northern woman who, and it's so I don't know if that's something you have had to navigate. And obviously this is as a non-expert and not as a woman, but how do you navigate those different tropes that people are so eager to put you into boxes in terms of the story of Scandinavian and Viking diaspora communities?
It's a hard one. It is a really, really hard one, absolutely, because there is this desire to, as you say, either it's the strong housewife or even warrior woman, or it's the one, I think in the you see this Viking achievement published in 1970 or whatever. Their women could be strong. Sometimes they all, the wife even had the last word.
Even
that is a loose quote, but that
is
that's kind of so I mean, it's hard, and I just want to make the point that, as others have done, even the early sort of gender archaeologists and everything we excavate, we get men and women. It's all there. We don't have to find the women.
No,
they are in the evidence, and everything that's achieved in society, even if it's like fences were built, say if we go with a very male stereotypical thing, then the men built the fences, say. But then all the other work that went around in the building of the fences, well, somebody has to do that. And, you know, that's where women come in, etc. So, and I think something that Tara and I tried to do in this chapter as well was looking at the household as a unit. And, you know, because, you know, some marriages work and others don't. And, you know, it will be the same in the Viking age, that if they were a really good working couple, they would have like a structure, like I do this, you do that. Now, then, you know, time management will have been crucial, because you need food, you need clothes, you need to survive. It'll be cold, winter is coming, the rain's coming, we need to get the harvest in. You know, that's like, so I think for a good household, you need a functioning unit of two people with, you know, everyone else who's part of the household. And I think that's what I want to try and emphasize more.
I mean, we could. This is only. I don't know if this conversation has done justice to everything we could be talking about here, because you've done so many important contributions to this field, and I just brimming with further questions. But I just want to try and hold myself back, because I think, you know, that this is just such exciting stuff, and I think we just need to use this as an opportunity to say, people, go read this stuff, you know, go get into this in some way and do your own research and build on this, because there's so much thirst out there for knowledge of this stuff, and you've put out so many really important works that are for academic audiences, and I think also for broader audiences are sort of really craving this kind of insight that you're providing, Alex. And I suppose as a final area, and I know this is again riding roughshod over so much, you know, you've been working with digital projects as well, and that's all about engagement and getting beyond the ivory tower. I wonder if you would be able to close with some insights into what you've been doing there.
You think about the work we did in Orkney, Ella?
Yeah.
I mean, that was quite fun. We just tried to get people to engage with their heritage, their stories connected to the landscape, by using digital technology, because we use it all the time, you know, like the GIS mapping and all kind of on these days. This was a while back now, but, you know, with all the online maps that we can use. I mean, everyone uses Google Maps or whatever. Also, because, as you know, in the older generation now, the ones who are like 70s, 80s and are dying off, especially in Orkney, where I was based at the time, then they hold so many stories about the landscape, about old traditions, folklore, and that's not been recorded. So we got some money from like a digital support fund based in Scotland, and we bought some, you know, quite simple tablets. And we had a really simple mapping program. And my colleague particularly, she went out to meet with elderly people, some care homes, and she got people to walk around the landscape and, you know, say, this is, you know, and telling, you know, this stone has this particular name and is and why. And then we got the stories, but they got to use the technology and learn how to use tablets and how things could be recorded digitally. It was great fun and really, really rewarding.
Wonderful. This is everything you do is a showcase for future researchers to build upon. It's really exciting, and as I said, I don't think we've really done justice to it, but I think at least we've been giving people an introduction to some of the projects you've been working on. And have you any final thoughts for potential students or members of the public who may be watching this about your kind of areas of research, any new directions you want to share or anything like that before we close?
Well, I guess I would just say that don't be scared of, you know, approaching a new area. Don't be scared of asking new questions, looking at new types of evidence, and, you know, don't doubt yourself. You think, really, does this make sense? Is this right? You know, because there's always new angles or new ways of looking at stuff, and also I guess the interdisciplinary aspect, because it's a bit tricky with like funding applications and everything, especially if you're using, you know, materials from different time periods, which I do all the time. But I think that's really rewarding, although yes, used with care. But I would also actually, you know, really encourage that kind of work.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been brilliant. And, you know, I just wish you all the very best with all your ongoing and future projects. And it's going to be exciting to see what's next.
Thanks very much, Howard. It was great fun. Good talking to you.
Follow Archaeodeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.